Hi, my name is Max Haynes, and today we will be discussing for loops in Java. So if you watched our previous video on switches, you're going to see a lot of a very similar layout here, where we start out by importing the scanner, go ahead and declare all of our variables. We ask the user how many loops they want to make, and then we go ahead and use the scanner to take that input directly from the PowerShell, and we run this for loop. So the way a for loops is going to be set up, start with the word for, and then we're going to declare this first variable. This variable is kind of like a counter. And we go ahead and declare the variable inside of this because it's only going to live inside of the for loop. So if we wanted it to be able to live outside of the for loop, we'd have to declare it before and then run it and then be able to pull it out of the for loop. But in this case, it'll just be run inside of the for loop. So what will happen is that it'll initially be declared at 0. As long as it is lower than whatever value the user enters, it's going to run, and then it will add 1 to itself. So what we did here with the output is initially set at 0 and it'll just count. So right now, all this is going to do is output is just going to count how many times this loop runs. So we can go ahead and compile it, and then we'll run it. And it's going to ask us how many loops we want to make. So we say, well, we want to make 4 loops. And it tells us 4 is how many loops that we ran. So that's nice. And there's a couple of things that can be done with for loops to where they will do different things. But here, all we're doing is just counting essentially the loops. But if, for instance, if you wanted to do more complex things inside of a loop where it was continually doing the same process every time, this can do that. The important thing here to remember is this less than sign. The less than user value is what's going to make it run 3 times. It's going to run up until that point. The thing to remember is the way a for loop runs is it first checks, runs, then adds. So that's what's happening there. So you can see here, if we change this to be less than or equals to, we recompile it and say we want to run 4 loops, it's going to tell us 5. So it added 5 times to it. So that's an important thing to remember is this less than, or if you went greater than and equals to, is to be sure that you're running the amount of times that you want to actually run. So that's one of the many things you can do with a for loop. Some of the other things that can be done with the for loop is actually nesting for loops. So I'm going to pause this video for just a little bit, and then I'm going to go ahead and create a nested for loop, and I'll show you what happens in that. So I've gone ahead and added in some here, and I'm going to continue to add in here just something to help us be able to tell where this code is actually running. So we'll just put a really simple, a couple of dots to let us know that the code is going to run below this line, so we don't get confused with the output here. But what we've done is we've put another for loop, this time using J, into our inside of our other for loop. And what it's going to do is this time that one's going to output or add to the output each time. But then after it runs, then the bottom one will print the output, and then we'll print one more time at the end. So we can go ahead and compile it, and we can run it. And so how many loops would we like to make? We want to make 4. And then the thing that happens here is this first one is what we entered. This second one, what it did was it took output of 0. And since the user value is 4, it ran it 4 times, and then it printed it. And then it went back to the top now. And now I is equal to 1, and j becomes 0 all over again. So it's going to add to that 4 more times, and so on and so forth. So we get 8, 12, 16. And then this final one, it prints one more time because of our print line there at the bottom. So an interesting thing we could do here is, let's say we didn't want this inside one to run for the same amount. Let's say we wanted the inside one to run 5 times, and we wanted the outside one to only run however many times we set it to run. So we can recompile it, run it. So we can say how many loops do we want to make here? We want to make 4 loops again. And this time, what happens is this first value, it adds it 5 times and then outputs and does that so on and so forth. So this is a really helpful tool, being able to run loops inside of loops. And that can make things be able to be done that otherwise might take a lot more code, because these can run inside of themselves. So a really interesting one to do here, just to kind of show off the power of it, is to go ahead and put in 50 here, and then we'll compile this with 50. And say we want to do it 4 times. So now very quickly, it's going to add up those 50s, which is something that would take a lot more code and a lot more loops to accomplish if we did it in a different format. And so that's what's happening here is those loops are running, and it runs, the outer loop starts, then the inner loop runs. And then when that inner loop finally hits its end, then the outer loop will go ahead, run that system line, add 1 to it, and run it all over again. And so it's important to remember the order of these for loops in order to make sure that the output that you're getting is correct when you're thinking through and making sure you don't get any logic errors in that sense. So this has been our class over for loops, and hopefully you learned something today.